Alexander Kane stood frozen in the doorway of his penthouse office, his eyes locked on the faint purple bruise peeking above the neckline of his sister's blouse, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis as a white-hot rage surged through his chest. "Who did this to you?" he growled, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that made Maya flinch, her teacup rattling against its saucer. The mark was no larger than a thumbprint, but to Alexander, it might as well have been a neon sign screaming that he'd failed again, that he'd lost her again, that the 8 years they'd spent apart had left scars he couldn't protect her from, and the thought made his hands shake with a fury, born not of anger but of terrifying, suffocating fear. Maya's eyes widened, her hand instinctively reaching for her collarbone, fingers brushing the tender skin as confusion flickered across her face before recognition dawned, and she opened her mouth to speak, but Alexander was already pacing, his Italian leather shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor of his corner office, overlooking the glittering Seattle skyline. His mind racing through every interaction she'd had in the past week, every person who'd come near her, every moment. He hadn't been there to shield her from whatever had left that mark. "Alex, please, just listen," Maya started, rising from the cream-colored armchair where she'd been waiting for their weekly lunch. But he cut her off with a sharp gesture, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his clean-shaven skin. "I gave you everything," he said, and his voice cracked despite his attempt to sound commanding. "I found you after all those years, brought you here, gave you a place in my home, in my company, and I asked for one thing, honesty, Maya, just honesty, and you can't even tell me who hurt you." The accusation hung in the air between them like shattered glass, and Maya felt something inside her chest constrict, because she understood, God, she understood where this was coming from, understood that beneath his expensive suit and his corner office and his reputation as the youngest CEO in the tech industry, Alexander was still that terrified 11-year-old boy who'd watched his baby sister get pulled into a different foster home, who'd spent 18 years searching for her, who'd hired private investigators and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars tracking her through the system until he'd finally found her 9 months ago. She took a slow breath, forcing her voice to remain steady even as tears pricked her eyes. "It's not what you think," she said softly, but Alexander spun on his heel, his eyes blazing with an emotion that looked like rage, but was really just fear, dressed up in armor. "Then what is it?" he demanded, and for a moment, the powerful CEO disappeared and all that remained was a broken boy who'd lost everything once and would burn the world down before letting it happen again. "Tell me right now, Maya, because I swear if someone laid a hand on you, if someone hurt you, I will." "It's from Mom," Maya whispered, and the words stopped him cold, his whole body going rigid as if she'd physically struck him. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of traffic 23 floors below and the quiet tick of the antique clock on Alexander's desk, the one that had belonged to the foster father who'd actually been kind to him, who'd encouraged him to go to college, to dream bigger than the broken system that had raised them both. "What?" Alexander's voice was barely audible now, all the rage draining out of him like water from a cracked vessel, leaving only confusion and something that looked painfully like hope. Maya's hand was still pressed against the mark on her chest, and slowly, carefully, she lowered herself back into the chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. "Sit down, Alex," she said gently. "Please, just sit down and let me explain." For a long moment, he didn't move, his pride and his fear warring visibly across his features. But then his shoulders sagged and he crossed to his desk, not sitting in his massive executive chair, but instead leaning against the edge, arms crossed, waiting. Maya looked down at her hands, gathering her thoughts, trying to figure out how to explain something she'd been carrying alone for so long. "Do you remember Mom's necklace?" she asked finally, her voice soft and distant, as if she were speaking from somewhere far away. the one with the silver bird. Alexander's breath caught because, yes, he remembered, their mother had worn it every single day. A delicate silver pendant shaped like a bird in flight, and she used to tell them it represented freedom, hope, the belief that no matter how hard life got, they could always rise above it. He nodded, not trusting his voice, and Maya continued. When they separated us, she said, and even now, 18 years later, the pain in those words was fresh and sharp. Mom gave it to me, pressed it into my hand, and told me to keep it safe. To remember that she loved us, that you loved me, that I was never alone, even when it felt like I was. Tears were sliding down her cheeks now, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. I kept it all these years, Alex, through 17 different foster homes, through the bad ones and the worse ones, through the times I wanted to give up, I kept it. Alexander felt his own eyes burning, his throat tight, because he'd searched for that necklace too, had asked about it when he'd finally been old enough to dig through the records, to find out what had happened to their mother's belongings, after she'd died in that car accident 6 months after they'd been taken from her. Where is it now? He asked roughly, and Maya's smile was sad and beautiful, and broke his heart into 1,000 pieces. 3 weeks ago, she said, I was walking home from the community center where I volunteered, you know, the one for foster kids downtown. Alexander nodded. He knew she spent every Saturday there, working with teenagers who were aging out of the system, trying to give them the guidance and support she'd never had, and he'd never been more proud of anyone in his life. There was a little girl, maybe 7 years old, sitting on the steps outside, crying so hard she could barely breathe. Maya continued, her voice trembling. She'd run away from our placement, said the other kids were mean, said nobody wanted her, said she wished she could just disappear. Alexander's hands gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles white, because he knew that feeling, had lived that feeling, had swallowed that bitter pill of unwantedness until he'd nearly choked on it. I sat with her for 2 hours, Maya said. Talked to her, told her my story. Told her about a boy who never stopped looking for his sister, who proved that love doesn't forget, that family isn't always blood, but it's always worth fighting for. She paused, swallowing hard. She asked me how I survived, how I kept hope, and I showed her the necklace, told her about Mom, about what it meant, about freedom and rising above and never giving up. Alexander could barely breathe now, could already see where this was going, and his heart was expanding and breaking simultaneously. She loved it, Maya whispered, loved it so much her whole face lit up, and for the first time since I'd found her, she smiled, and Alex, it was like looking at us, at who we used to be. And I couldn't. Her voice broke completely, and she pressed her fist against her mouth, shoulders shaking. You gave it to her, Alexander finished, his voice thick with emotion, and Maya nodded, tears streaming freely now. I put it around her neck, she said, and I told her it was magic, told her it would keep her safe, remind her that someone believed in her, and she hugged me so tight, Alex, so desperately tight, and the clasp was broken. I'd been meaning to fix it, and when she pulled away, the edge of the pendant caught my skin, scratched me right here. She touched the mark again, and I didn't even care, because the look on her face was worth everything. Worth every year I'd carried it, every time I'd held it in the dark and wished for rescue. Alexander couldn't speak, couldn't move, could barely process the enormity of what she'd done, the sacrifice she'd made, the beautiful, selfless, utterly Maya thing she'd done, and he realized with stunning clarity that he'd been so busy trying to protect her, so consumed with making sure nothing and no one could hurt her ever again, that he'd forgotten to trust her, forgotten to see her not as the helpless baby sister he'd lost, but as the incredible woman she'd become despite everything the world had thrown at her. Her name is Sophie, Maya said quietly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I've been visiting her every week, working with her social worker to make sure she gets placed somewhere good, somewhere safe. And Alex, She's doing better. She's really doing better. And every time I see her wearing that necklace, I think about Mom, and I think she'd be proud. I think she'd want that symbol of hope to keep flying, to keep spreading, to mean something to someone who needs it as much as we did. Alexander pushed off from the desk, crossed the space between them in 3 strides, and dropped to his knees in front of his sister's chair, taking her hands in his. This powerful man in his $1,000 suit, kneeling on his office floor, with tears running down his face. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "Maya, I'm so sorry. I should have asked. Should have trusted you. Should have known you'd never do anything to hurt yourself or throw away what we've built. And instead, I saw that mark and I panicked. I thought I was losing you again. Thought someone was taking you from me. And I couldn't see past my own fear to remember that you're strong. You're incredible. You're so much better than I ever gave you credit for." Maya slid from the chair onto the floor beside him, wrapping her arms around her brother, and they held each other the way they hadn't been allowed to on that terrible day. 18 years ago, when the social workers had pulled them apart, held each other like the scared, broken children they'd been, and the healed, hopeful adults they were becoming. "You're not going to lose me," Maya whispered into his shoulder. "I'm not going anywhere, Alex, I promise, but you have to let me live. Have to let me make choices, even when they scare you, even when they involve risk or sacrifice, because that's what Mom taught us, right? That love means letting go, means trusting, means believing in something bigger than our fear." Alexander pulled back, looking at his sister's face, really looking. Maybe for the first time since he'd found Harand, he saw not the 7-year-old he remembered, not the broken foster kid he'd imagined, but a 25-year-old woman with their mother's eyes and a strength that humbled him. A woman who'd survived everything and chosen kindness anyway, who'd lost everything and decided to give anyway, who'd been hurt by the world and responded by trying to heal it. "Tell me about her," he said finally, his voice still rough, but steady now. "Tell me about Sophie, about the community center, about everything I've been too afraid to ask, because I was so busy trying to control things I can't control." And Maya did. Sitting there on the floor of his corner office, while the afternoon sun slanted through the windows and painted everything gold, she told him about the kids she worked with, the stories they carried, the hopes they harbored, the dreams they were afraid to speak out loud. And Alexander listened, really listened, and felt something shift in his chest, some locked door opening to let light into spaces that had been dark for far too long. "I want to help," he said when she finished, and Maya looked at him questioningly. "The community center, the kids. I want to do more than just write checks. I want to be involved, want to learn, want to make a difference the way you're making a difference." Maya's smile was radiant, transforming her whole face. "I was hoping you'd say that," she admitted, "because there's a boy there. Marcus. He's 17, about to age out. And he's brilliant, Alex. Absolutely brilliant, with computers and coding. But he has no resources, no connections, no way to go to college or get training. And I thought maybe bring him in," Alexander interrupted, his mind already racing with possibilities. "Scholarships, internships, mentorship programs. Bring all of them in, any kid who wants a chance, who's willing to work, who needs someone to believe in them." The way he paused, swallowing hard, the way we needed someone to believe in us. They stayed on that floor for another hour, making plans, sharing memories, building bridges between the past that had broken them and the future they were choosing to create. And when Alexander finally stood and helped Maya to her feet, he felt lighter somehow, as if the anger and fear he'd been carrying like armor had been replaced with something more powerful: purpose, connection, hope. "I love you," he said, and it was easier this time, the words less frightening, more honest. "I love you, and I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry it took me so long to say it, to really mean it, without all the fear attached." "I love you too," Maya replied, squeezing his hand, "and Alex, thank you for finding me, for never giving up, for being the kind of man who turns pain into protection even when it comes out wrong. Mom would be proud of you too. That evening, Alexander sat alone in his penthouse apartment, looking out at the city lights scattered below like fallen stars. And he thought about marks and scars, about the ones that hurt us and the ones that heal us, about how sometimes the things that look like damage are really evidence of love, proof that we were brave enough to care, strong enough to sacrifice, human enough to bleed for something that matters. He thought about his sister, about a little girl named Sophie wearing a silver bird necklace, about a boy named Marcus who deserved a chance, about all the broken pieces of all the broken systems that had shattered his childhood, and instead of rage, instead of the bitter resentment he'd carried for so long, he felt something new: determination. Not to protect Maya from the world, but to work beside her to make it better, to take their pain and transform it into purpose, to let their scars become stories that might light the way for someone else stumbling in the dark. The mark on Maya's chest would fade in time, the bruised skin healing until no trace remained, but what it represented: the courage to give, the strength to trust, the wisdom to let go. Those marks would remain forever, invisible but indelible, carved not on skin but on soul. And Alexander understood now that those were the marks that mattered, the ones that proved we'd been here, we'd loved, we'd tried, we'd made a difference in whatever way we could. 3 months later, Alexander stood in the newly renovated wing of the community center, Maya at his side, watching 17 teenagers gather for the first session of the Kane Foundation Scholarship Program. And when he saw Sophie sitting in the front row, the silver bird catching the light at her throat, her face bright with excitement and possibility, he felt his mother's presence so strongly it took his breath away, felt her in the freedom of giving, in the hope of rising, in the love that never, ever forgets. And he knew with absolute certainty that some marks aren't meant to be erased, they're meant to be earned, honored, and passed forward. Proof that even broken things can heal, even lost things can be found, and even the deepest wounds can become the source of the most profound strength.